Welcome. If you're a woman who has a sense that there's more out there for you, you're in the right place. I'm Whitney Baker, host of the Electric Ideas podcast. Somewhere along the line of work and kids, life carried on, but I lost track of my truth. I'm on a reflective journey, and that's what this podcast is all about. Each week, I interview a woman who is lighting her own path and offering others hope. Before our conversation ends, we'll share a reflective question for you to explore. Sometimes all we need is a jolt, a fresh idea, an aha moment that connects us to a sense of possibility. This, my friends, is what I call an electric idea.
Welcome back to the Electric Ideas podcast. I'm your host, Whitney Baker. Before we jump into today's episode, I want to let you know that my free Tend to Your Soul toolkit is now available. If you didn't catch last week's episode of the podcast, I shared 5 centering habits that help me stay connected to myself even when life gets wonky. Because I want you to have easy access to these practices too, I put them together in an easy to digest toolkit that has some other good resources for you. It's called Tend to Your Soul Toolkit, and you can download it today. There's a link in the show notes. If you have any issues finding it, or you do find it and you have any questions or feedback, or simply just want to say hi, I'd love to hear from you. You can message me on Instagram at @WhitneyWoman. And while I'm not on social media all the time, I will get back to you within a few days. Okay, so let's jump into today's show. We all know how connection is so important to our sense of well-being, and being able to communicate and talk with and listen to different types of people is a big part of that. And this is why I am so excited to welcome Dr. Amanda Kenderes to the show today. Amanda is a professor of interdisciplinary studies at Humphreys University. She has a PhD in social science and comparative education from UCLA, and she recently published her first book called Talk Types: How What We Say Reveals Who We Are. I know you're going to have a lot of great takeaways from this conversation, so let's get into it. Hi, Amanda. Welcome to the show.
Hi, Whitney. Thank you so much for having me.
I know that you grew up spending a lot of time all over the world, and I'm wondering how moving so much and this global upbringing influenced you becoming such a student of communication.
Yeah, my story, sort of as quickly as possible, is that, my dad worked for the US Embassy. So we moved every 3 years to a new continent. And as a kid, I realized, okay, we're going to be moving on very quickly. I need to connect with people quickly because I don't have time to wait around and build slow relationships. And that's going to make my time in any one place better, is to have connections now. And so I started to experiment with talk from an early age because I knew that I liked deep talk. And I saw that people around me didn't really deep dive like that right away, sometimes maybe at all. People do small talk with each other, that sort of thing. I'm really ultimately interested in the deep talk. Let's just skip the small talk and dive right into it. So I did, and it didn't go over very well. So I thought, well, maybe deep talk, it's not for kids. Maybe it's more for adults. So then I'd transition to the adults in my life. And I would ask them, what is happiness? Or if they were married, how did you know you'd found the one? This didn't go over very well either, for various reasons, but I didn't have the kind of insight and foresight to see that at the time. I just got quite depressed. And I thought, where does that leave me? It kind of got me down. And so I kind of kept that inside. It could have gone south quickly, and luckily it didn't. Instead, I just grew even more determined to answer the questions I was building about communication. And I learned to just kind of do like others. I learned the small talk. I learned all of the stuff. And so you wouldn't know from the outside that any of this was going on inside. But over the next decade, I started to find answers, and each answer begged a new question. And I kept asking more and more questions. And finally, at 19, I had this epiphany where I realized that communication came in categories. Then I could work backwards, and I saw that there were these 3 categories in operation, and finally published the book last year. And so that's my story of how I got there.
We're definitely going to get into your book, Talk Types, but I just want to respond to so many things that came up for me when you were talking. I feel like many women, and especially during the time of those who choose to be mothers during the young kids' age, there's less of noise. And I can speak from my own experience that there's just this loss of true, meaningful connection and conversation. And I had moments where I was like, I want anything but small talk. I don't want to hear about your kids' vegetables. And I want to like talk to a adult, a human about something deeper. What's your recommendation for whether you're in that phase of your life or not, moving past small talk? And if it's for everybody or not?
It's interesting because our world is smaller as kids and it expands over time. And as a kid, I thought, well, clearly everyone is like me. And I loved small talk. I thought that was the ultimate goal of all people's talk. But actually, now after coming up with this talk type model, I realized, well, that's just not the case. I'm a C dominant, I'm a CA, and C dominants are going to be happiest when they get enough, they get their C tank filled. And when their C tank is running on empty, it's draining. You feel like you're in survival and life's just going through the motions, and yeah, and you don't, have patience for as much for some of the other types of talk because you need that baseline. But there are other types that, an AB, for example, or anybody, any talk type without C, they don't have the same needs for that deep connection. And if we consider B dominance, BC and BA, they're the ones that do the small talk the most. For example, during the pandemic, we all had to stay home. A lot of B dominants grew quite depressed because they needed that relating with other people and they weren't getting it. So their tank was getting low. So it is relative. But the beautiful thing here, I think, there's not one communication normal. There are 6 normals, and I'm one of them. And all of your listeners are one of them. And they might be different, but we're not a defective someone else. We're a normal us. And that's a very validating thing. So yes, ultimately, some of us may want to skip the small talk and definitely the context of our life. But yeah, not all of us are looking to skip the small talk. And ultimately, we all have different tanks. And in recognizing that, it validates us and it sort of lets others off the hook. We don't take things as personally when we see that.
Yeah. I think that also in reading this book, I was thinking more about, yeah, it's important. I think knowing your talk type, you can feel whether or not your connection needs are getting met. But I also feel like it gave me this lens of being generous and making other people feel comfortable sharing within
Totally.
their own talk type. I literally had I had 2 moments. One was like, I want to have lunch with little Amanda. And then and secondly, it just was that some people love small talk and that's okay. And that's like a generous thing to meet them where they're at too. And so those were just 2 kind of things that stood out. You talked a little bit
You're right.
there and referenced some of the talk types. I know that there is nuance, but is it fair to break them down into kind of ABC as dominant and talk about it from there so people can get a feel for whether they
Yeah.
or someone they love might fit in one of those categories?
Yeah, that's a good way to kind of look at the 6 types initially to just enter that way. We have 2 A dominants, 2 B dominants, 2 C dominants. Yeah.
So do you want to tell us a little bit about each? I know that the A dominant are the informers, the B dominant are the relators, and the C dominant are the meaning makers. And just that might spark something in people, and they might already know kind of which dominance they have. But do you want to give us just an eagle's eye overview of which each category
Sure.
might mean?
Sure. So for the A dominants or the informers, if you're an A dominant, let me preface all this by saying there are technical definitions in the book that might throw some people off, but also it is what it is. A is objective understanding. And I think it's important to kind of just really quickly visit this. C is subjective understanding. B's share their subjective experience. So all over the planet, interestingly, there are two reasons for talking. If we go big, and we're talking 8 billion people on the planet only talk for two reasons ever. That's big. Okay. So, what are those reasons? All people talk to either share our experiences or share our understanding. That's it. Everything is categorizable into these two groups. But the reason that I get three fundamental reasons for talking, A, B, and C, is because our understanding can be objective or subjective. So it ultimately breaks down again into two subcategories. An objective understanding, that's like two scientists looking under a microscope. And I see, okay, I see a proton and a neutron and an electron. I see that. You look under a microscope, you're a scientist, you see the same thing. In other words, it doesn't matter who the subject is. The fact is objective. It's 2 + 2 = 4. It's objective. But a subjective understanding, oh, it does matter. Let me tell you about how I've grown, through the years and how I've faced my challenges. I'm going to tell you my understanding. I'm going to do my best to share my understanding of that journey, but the subject does matter because nobody can tell that story for me better than I can. That's my own story to tell. So that's how we get these three categories. Whereas B shares experience, whether that's, the timeline of my day. Here are some cute pictures of my dog and, in her Halloween costume. That's B. It's my subjective experience. This is my reaction. I'm looking for your reaction, what have you. So the A dominants are going to be looking to be understood. That's why they talk. They want to be understood objectively. And all of these, by the way, it's also not only why we talk, but it's why we listen. So an A dominant is listening for objective information when somebody else talks. So anyway, so the A dominants, they're the informers. I got A, B, and AC. AB, you've got people like Bill Gates, Elizabeth Warren. They're kind of geeky, nerdy, and they're really good at brainstorming because they don't have that C to weigh them down to think about the human implications. It's just like, oh no, let's play with ideas. Whereas an AC, like Barack Obama, will be fact forward, but there's that gravitas underneath that you can feel that, no, these facts mean something to me. And I think they mean something to America, or so that kind of thing. Okay, so that's our A dominant. Our B dominants, BA and BC. BA would be, they're the most varied. Honestly, the BAs, for a variety of reasons I won't go into, but B is the most varied. And so BA, you get folks like Stephen Colbert, Bill O'Reilly, Marilyn Monroe. I mean, very varied. But at the end of the day, these folks are using A at the service of their B. So when they're taking in facts and information, there's a plan for those facts to be used in a way to relate to people. Okay, and then the BCs, you've got folks like Amy Schumer. And then, so the BCs are kind of the social butterflies of the six. And then the C dominants, CA and CB. The CAs would be like Jon Stewart, Matt Damon, and any of these types, they can be funny. I mean, Jon Stewart is a comedian, but there's a gravitas that leads why he does what he does. And the facts are there to serve the meaning. And then you've got quintessential CB like Oprah Winfrey, who will interview somebody and really get in there and talk about the childhood and go deep. I mean, deep and vulnerable, but then come up for air to do B. Like, girl, wait a minute. Let me see your nails. You got your nails done. That's the B coming up for air that will differentiate a C, CB from CA. It's just, are they doing A for relief from their C, or are they doing B? That's our sort of bird's eye view overview.
Thank you for that explanation. I know that you wrote a whole book about this, and obviously there is a lot of nuance, but I'm guessing that people who are listening kind of leaned in when they heard something that sounded like them or someone who they love without having, a full understanding of the types. What do you wish people understood about just respecting diverse communication styles after kind of seeing like, whoa, all these people do have different ways of communicating and wanting to hear information too?
I think so. A couple things here. Yes, you're absolutely right. I agree. We are diverse, but what's ironic is we're not as diverse as we might have thought. There are only
Mm.
6 talk types, first of all. I mean, that's not much. If you look at study the years of communication theory, it's a mess. Across multiple academic disciplines, there's no unifying theory because it seems way more complex than it is. So there's that. It's actually quite simple, but the implications of it are profound and vast. Now, what's a pitfall? I think without really understanding all the stuff that's going on, I think one of the common pitfalls is to self-referentiate and say, gosh, the way that I am is right and the way that others are is wrong, or the way that I am is better and the way others are is not as good. However we reframe it, if there's still this, I guess, evaluation that puts us in a privileged position and puts others in a less privileged position relatively. And I think that can be an inclination that when we learn more about the talk types, we kind of lean away from, which is nice. It's refreshing. With the 6 talk types, it's probably going to be common for us to feel a little bit different than people when we talk to them, because even though there are 6 talk types, it's not that many. We're one of these 6 talk types. And most likely, when we talk with most people, most of the time, we're going to be interacting with people who don't share our talk type. So at any given moment, we can feel a little bit different. That said, at the same time, there's always an overlap with every single talk type. So even if we're not talking with an identical talk type, there is an overlap in at least one category with everyone. So that's useful. So no matter who we're talking to, we are not without a point of commonality. And
Yeah.
that's a good thing to remember.
So you're immersed in this, but for a listener who I think all of us have those people that are like, you meet, you talk, and it's just like, well, it's like the long lost friend and it's just exciting. And then sometimes at a dinner party or a wedding, you get seated next to someone and it's just like not firing. What would you recommend the layperson explore if they are trying to connect with someone and it's just not going well? And they want to think outside of themselves and maybe consider engaging someone who clearly is a different talk type.
That's one of the beautiful kind of takeaways of this model is it gives us an advantage, and not in a bad way, but in a high utility way. When we know about the talk types, it puts us in that power seat to be able to adjust our conversation in a way that improves everybody's experience. Let's say we're seated next to someone at a dinner party. It's not going super well. It's like pulling teeth. We've all been there. At this point, if we're familiar with the talk types, we can think, okay, what is that person's talk type? We can start by what category don't they have? Okay, I'm a CA. Maybe I'm talking to a BA. All right, I can see that they don't have C. We're not going to be able to dive deep next to each other here. So, okay, I'm going to let go of that expectation. But now what's our area of overlap? They have BA, I have CA. Okay, it's A. A is our area of overlap. So, probably that's going to be the most natural area of connection, but it's still not their dominant. So if I really want to be gracious to them, I want to ask them to tell me about their day or some anecdotes or their experiences with something. So a good point of entry is just to ask questions and let the other person just naturally unfold with the questions that we give them. And then whichever questions we get the most positive feedback from, we can keep at it. Sure. Are we adjusting ourselves and giving the other person maybe a better time in the conversation where they can shine in a more natural way and we're not? Sure. But when that happens, it still improves our own experience.
Yeah,
It's
I'm
still
glad you
better.
pointed that out because we don't
Yeah.
want to it's not about being inauthentic in a conversation,
No.
but I feel like it's more being, like you said, gracious and generous and helping other people share in a way that's
Yeah.
more meaningful for both of you. So
Yeah.
that makes
Exactly.
sense. What about feedback on the book? What have people reached out to you in terms of being like, aha, moments of revelation in their personal communication? after reading and understanding the talk types?
Yeah, lots of different revelations from different areas. I was talking with a psychologist the other day, and she said, well, my gosh, I'm really rethinking my whole practice because in family systems theory or psychodynamic theory, we've got this idea that okay, we play a role or our childhood shapes our adulthood, etc., but we don't understand. I think it's hard to understand why that happens to begin with. How is it that we end up in these roles? How is it that our childhood ends up, in many cases, shaping our adulthood so much? And she said that with a talk type model, so many of the conflicts that people experience and the clients that come into her office, she's like, I work with families where they have the, proverbial black sheep teenager of the family who's acting out, always seem to have problems. Okay, well, maybe this is a C dominant kid and they're the only C in the whole family. And they need that kind of heartfelt connection and conversations to feel secure growing up, and they're not getting it and they don't even know how to ask for it. They don't even know what's missing. They just feel it. And so they act out. And the moment that they are able to see, okay, this is me, and this is my parents, this is my family, and this is what's happening, then everybody has a shift in consciousness and in the way that they interact with each other. And I've seen that for sure. You grow up in a family that doesn't really know how to nurture your differences because they
Or
don't
talk
have
type.
those the talk type. And so, yeah, it does have an impact on people and on families. And a lot of folks don't even realize that they have this talk type. They think there's something else as kids and teenagers. And then when they go into college and beyond and they start interacting with people that are like them, they find them. It's like, wow, this is my tribe. Oh, I guess I am this way. It puts their whole past into perspective.
That's really interesting, though. I want to jump in because we chatted briefly and you asked me before we started chatting what I thought I was. And I was like, I think CB. And you're like, yeah, I think so too. And as I was reading this book, I have a kind, loving father who also happens to be an engineer. And I'm like, A. And, I laugh because I think about me asking him, how's work going? And getting the facts and him asking me about work. And it would be like, oh, my life, it just would be such a different answer. And it's not that he doesn't want to be generous in his sharing. It's just he has a different style. Your book made me appreciate that and have a little bit more compassion that maybe somebody who's communicating in a different way isn't withholding. It's just a difference.
Absolutely. I love that distinction. And I love that you mentioned it's absolutely right. We can have the same question like, how's work going? And someone can answer in A, B, or C. It's not content driven, this model. I mean, we can talk about the same content in A, B, or C. We can joke in A, B, and C, flirt in A, B, and C. So when, you ask your dad, "Hey, how's work going?" And if he's an A dominant, yeah, he's going to interpret that question from his own vantage point, which is, "Oh, let me give you the my objective understanding. So here are the facts." And if he asks you, you're going, "Well, I'm a C dominant. I'm going to give you my subjective understanding, which is, this is the trajectory of where I've come, where I'm at now. And these are some really good things that have been happening. And I'm looking forward to seeing, where those go and all that."
Yes.
Oh, absolutely. So it's absolutely insightful. I love that distinction.
I know we're coming up on time, but I have a few more questions. I just want to make sure I'm able to connect with you on. I've read a lot of articles. Something's in the water this month, but I've seen lots of articles about how we're kind of living in this generation, maybe the generation's a bit younger than me, of chosen isolation. And I was just wondering if you, from you have a PhD in social science and you wrote a book about talk. Can you remind us fundamentally why it's important to even try to communicate in person with people?
Society globally has gotten so polarized, and there have been a number of things leading up to it. Things have just changed so quickly for people around the world, so quickly that people don't have this that space to catch up mentally. And so it leads to resistance all over. And that resistance is often coming out politically, or, with violence, and with isolation too. People just kind of, they just can't. They just, like, I'm going to just tune everything out, and I'm going to do sort of the quiet quitting at work, and I'm going to do, all of that. But what have been the consequences of that? They're dire. Our mental health issues have been rising and really kind of gone through the roof. I think it's pretty clear that it's not working. Isolation, not talking to each other, it's not working. Now, have we come up with an alternative plan? Not yet. But I think very clearly we're going to need to find a pathway back to person communication and connection, because we're facing mental health crises. Yeah, and it's just not working. Why is it important? I mean, it's baked into who we are. It's fundamental to being human. We need touch. I mean, why is it that in our prisons, kind of the worst possible punishment for somebody really is isolation? So there's very clearly a fundamental need for human connection, for human touch, for human interaction, for belonging. And much of it can only be met in person, with another warm body. But I
Thank
think we're
you.
going to have to find our way back to that. And the path hasn't emerged yet. We're in the middle of it.
I appreciate that reflection. I want to bring it full circle before we close. We started out with talking about how little Amanda wanted to have some deep seas with people that were not feeling the deep seas. What is your best advice for people who feel like they just haven't found their tribe?
Yeah, that's such a great question. First of all, I would say just off the bat, your tribe exists. If you haven't found them yet, number one, learn more. So figure out your talk type, really get it, nail it down, figure out, make sure that that's the one, and then go find your people. They absolutely exist. It's challenging to try and find our tribe when we don't have a streamlined methodology. We're just like kind of haphazardly like, okay, I'm going to try this, try this, try this. And then your mom says, hey, why don't you join a club, a book club or a knitting club or whatever, where you can find people that share your hobbies. But that's not our tribe. If it were our hobbies that connected us, we would all be best friends with everyone who shared our college major. It's talk. You go to the book club or the knitting club, and we break off into our subgroups based on talk. So, how do you find people that share your talk type? If you're an informer, relator, or meaning maker, let that guide you. If you are an informer, you're probably going to need to find some kind of group, join some kind of group or social activity that's informational based. And if you're looking, for relators, it's going to be probably more kind of a social, could be political, but some kind of gathering where you have space to be heard. That's the ultimate goal of a relator. The A's and B's want to be understood, B's want to be heard. So find a place where nobody, where you're not getting interrupted, where you have a platform for your voice. And that's why it could be political, it could be social, it could be environmental, anything like this where you have a voice. And then for the C's, the meaning makers, maybe plug into activities where meaning is central to that, whether that's a volunteer work or, even meetup groups that are topical or philosophical, depending on, if you're more CA or CB or what. But letting that drive your search can really reduce the amount of time you spend looking.
That's super helpful. Thank you for sharing that approach and lens. I always end my episodes with an opportunity for reflection. So, in this area of wanting to connect and talk with all types of people for more meaningful connection for you and them, what's one question women could be asking themselves more?
I think, honestly, women, and especially women working outside the home and mothers, like we're so used to taking care of other people first. So a question that I would ask, I would say, secure your own mess before assisting others. And that as a question is, how's my self-care? Am I taking care of myself? Yes, we can go into that dinner party and turn up the dial on somebody else's communication categories and try to help other people feel at ease. And that's absolutely important. We need those skills, but we never want to do that at the expense of our own self care. And we can't do a good job of it anyway if our tank is not filled. So I would say check in, make sure that your talk type tank is filled and find places to fill it if it's not. And then only from that place can we be the best versions of ourselves with other people.
I am so with you. That's definitely going to vibe with my Electric Ideas listeners. Amanda, thank you for all the thoughtful responses. Where can we find you and get your book?
Book is on Amazon, Barnes & Noble, and you can find me on amandakenderes.com and talktypes.com. Talktypes.com is more informational resource space where you can take a talk type test. You can find some examples. So you can go there for that. And then amandakenderes.com if you want to connect with me personally. There's a forum you can fill out and be in touch.
Wonderful. I feel like this is going to be very enlightening and inspiring for so many listeners. So thank you for being here.
Of course. It's been a pleasure. And thank you so much for having me, Whitney.
I'm so glad you joined me today. If you're looking for more, feel free to connect with me on Instagram at @WhitneyWoman. And if you enjoyed the show, I invite you to support me by leaving a review or sharing it with a friend. Hope you have an inspired day.